The future's a mystery, but what's new in history? Hey guys, I have a cool episode for us today. Title being Early Humans Dined on Giant Sloths and Other Ice Age Giants, Archaeologists Find. This is a story that's kind of been in my head when I read another article about a year or so ago. And when this article came out, this new study, I thought I'm in luck because now I could talk to you guys about this. Okay, so imagine you step into South America 12,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago. You would see a lot of animals. You would see jaguars, capybaras, which are like the giantest rodents in the world, tapirs, but you'd see a world of giant animals. So, like when I say giant sloths, we're talking about sloths the size of elephants. And while we're talking about elephants, there were mastodons in the more southern part of South America. Mastodons meaning like mammoths. The armadillos were so big, they're like a living tank. So imagine an armadillo with a hard shell, and it's huge, like a Volkswagen. And the shocking part is that the Native Americans there, they didn't just like hide from these guys or, share the land with them. They definitely ate them, so they most likely hunted them. And probably now we're back to saying that they probably drove them into extinction or had a big part of it. When I was young, that was the story, that the humans had a big part in destroying what they call megafauna. Megafauna basically means big animals at the time. And then, people were kind of being nicer to the ancient people, saying that, well, maybe they didn't, maybe it was climate change and that kind of thing. And of course, that probably played some role in it. But the main point of the study and the article is that humans most likely did play a major part in this. But what I also want to talk about is just these animals in general and the study, because it's just so amazing to me, the whole thing. So the article also has a link to the study, which I also read, which you might want to take a look at. I'll, of course, leave it in the show notes. It's the study is in Science Advances, and it was published just now, if you're listening to this now, in October 2025, and it sheds new light on this time. Basically, what the study did was count the animal bones at 20 sites in Argentina, modern-day Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. And these places are reliably dated to before 11,600 years ago, because that's the date. At 11,600 years is when pretty much these giant beasts were extinct by now. So these sites are reliably dated to before that. And they compared the remains of the big animals versus the smaller animals to see which were more abundant. And then they closely examined the bones to make sure that they had cut marks and signs that, show that they were butchered and eaten by humans, not that they were just some animals living in the cave and such. And it turns out that the ancient humans, the ancient Native Americans, were kind of like the salespeople that I like to say today. It's funny, when I took sales classes, we say like you have different kinds of, if you're looking for customers, we used to call them elephants, deer, and rabbits. Sometimes people call them whales, that kind of thing. So basically, they checked all the bones out, and, they had the same kind of a deal. They could have giants, like giant sloths or giant mastodons, or they could have middle-sized animals like deer-like creatures or small little rodents. And guess what? Lo and behold, human beings being what they are, they went for the big stuff over the little stuff, because it takes you a lot of effort to catch a bunch of rabbits and eat them versus catching something really big and feeding everybody with it. And that apparently seems what the study shows. It actually shows that by a long shot, and not just by weight, because the study's very thorough. I recommend you checking it out, because it does go by like less work to get more meat, So you might think, well, maybe there was like one giant sloth and then there was a whole bunch of little bones. No, there was actually more of the big bones too. So these ancient humans, I mean, unless they were finding big giant sloths and mammoths just laying around dead and they were going to pull them away from the other scavengers, most likely were hunting these things. So like I said, I'm going to leave the notes to the study and the article in the show notes, the link, I should say, to the study and the article in the show notes, so you could, check it out yourself. I'm of the opinion, I agree with what the authors are saying. I read their methods and such. The main point of their argument is saying that the humans were involved in the extinction of these giant beasts. To me, that's pretty interesting in itself. But I want to talk about these giant beasts, and we could talk about a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about how long were people living alongside these giant beasts, and let's talk about these giant beasts, because megafauna is a scientific word, but I mean, megafauna means big beasts. Like if you were a kid reading about dinosaurs and you got to the Ice Age part where the saber-toothed tigers are and the giant sloths and the mammoths, I mean, this is what we're talking about. And again, I want you to just imagine humans living around these things, near these things, and then probably hunting them. And not hunting them with guns, obviously, but hunting them with, Stone Age technology. This is way before metalworking. There was no, metal arrows or spears or anything like that. Everything they had to use was wood and stone. And before I start that, let me just mention a part of the study so that you know what they were finding in different places. A quote from the study: extinct megafauna dominates in 15 of the 20 pre-extinction assemblages, with values of more than 80% in 13 of them. In particular, Mylodon darwini dominates in Patagonia, Megatherium americanum in Pampas, and Mastodon platensis in central Chile. So let's talk about these guys. Let's start with the Mylodon. It's a ground sloth, a giant ground sloth, because it has a total body length of up to 4 meters, which is over 13 feet, and a mass of up to 2 tons. 2 tons. It had claws up to 20 centimeters, curved claws, 20 centimeters each, which is almost 8 inches, 8-inch claws. And it couldn't run very fast. It was still sloth, so it's not like these giant sloths were fast sloths. These particular ones, they could only go maybe as fast as an elephant. So, and they have found mummified remains with their skin and all, and they had hair on them. Another interesting thing is they had these bony plates throughout them, scattered in different parts of underneath their skin. So I imagine the humans had to learn where to stab them so that they could, kill them. But they probably also had to be careful of those claws, man. Just imagine a 2-ton animal, 13 feet with giant claws. It's kind of like a bear. The difference between a bear, it's like a big bear. The difference between a bear and this guy is they were not carnivores. They were herbivores. But, they're a herbivore with big claws. And the humans apparently like to eat them. Apparently, they also like to eat this guy, Megatherium. He is the largest of all the giant ground sloths, like truly massive claws. Each forelimb had 3 giant claws, with the middle being the longest, like a sloth, if you've seen those cute little sloths, except this one had these 3 giant claws. The middle one, the longest one, was 12 inches long, 30 centimeters. They were really strong and they were compressed. They're shaped more like sides than like a bear claws. And these claws were attached to these huge forelimbs because their bones are big, and so they had strong muscles, so they could strip branches, possibly rip trees down. You'll see pictures of them standing up on a tree, or dig holes, dig tunnels. We'll talk about some tunnels a little bit later. So these were truly massive. They were 6 meters long, which is 20 feet, and they weighed around 8,000 pounds. So 4 tons. They're comparable to an African elephant, a really, really big elephant. So 20 feet long, 12-inch claws, and they say they could probably stand up. So when they stood up, they're like 6 meters high, 20 feet tall, like a 2-story building. And they also, when like standing next to, they look like they're about 7 feet tall, maybe. So 2 meters-ish tall, just when they're walking, and 20 feet long, 6 meters long, and huge claws. So the humans had no problem going after these guys with stone tools and stone arrows and such, and chopping them up and eating them. And then the Mastodon is like a mastodon. It's like an elephant, a mammoth, These were not as big as the sloths because they're not as big as an African elephant. They're more like the size of an Asian elephant. They had a body mass of 3 to 4 tons. And, they were big boys too. They didn't have big claws though. And then we also had giant armadillos, which maybe not as scary quite to think of, I guess, when you're comparing them to 12-inch claws on giant sloths, bigger than bears, 20 feet long. But these guys, I don't know if I'd want to run into one either. I mean, let's see. They could be up to 4 meters long, so it's 13 feet, 1.5 meters tall, 5 feet tall, and weighed like 1 to 2 tons. It kind of sounds to me like a Volkswagen Bug, like a Volkswagen Bug moving along with covered in armor, like a turtle shell, with like an armadillo, but an enormous one. They had 1,000 bony plates on it. Some of them had bony clubs on their tail, like an ankylosaurus. If you any dinosaur fans out there, they just ate grass and stuff like that, and they lived in South America, and they also became extinct around the time of these other giants. I'm sure the aliens haven't released the video yet, but it probably just makes sense that they think that the humans probably just hit them over the head and stunned them and then flipped them over and got them on the belly. Because, you weren't going to be throwing spears and stuff at this guy. So it definitely would have taken a coordinated effort, I would imagine, to catch yourselves one of these guys. So the fact that humans lived alongside of these things have just always amazed me. And, the study and the article talk about a lot about, the humans may have caused their extinction. So there's a couple things on this, and I'll bet you other stuff will come out. So there's a lot of discussion on the Americas, when the Americas were peopled. I'll put some links to a good episode from the Ancient Americas YouTube channel on that and the latest research on that. So, when I was young and for many years, and there's still some holdouts, they feel that the Clovis, you may have heard of the Clovis points, the Clovis culture of the Native Americans. Clovis is a site in New Mexico that found arrow points, etc., from around 13,000 years ago. So today there's still some controversy. Well, there's a lot of controversy, but I'm of the opinion, as are many other historians and podcasters like myself now, that the Americas were most likely peopled before 13,000 years ago. Maybe the Clovis were a new people that came in. Part of the study mentions maybe these animals were hunted to extinction because of new technologies, maybe because of, new people, more people, that kind of thing. It could be the new technologies. Maybe it was pretty hard to kill an armadillo or a giant sloth with the technologies that the other people have. But we can be pretty sure that the Americas were peopled before 13,000 years ago. There's the site in New Mexico now in White Sands, which are it's got a very convincingly that these footprints are from 21,000 to 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. And there's also sites in South America. Most famously now is the Monte Verde site in southern Chile. And that suggests human activity from as far back as 18,500 years ago. And that's in South America. and the Clovis finds are in North America. So historically, the consensus was, the mainstream consensus was that the Americas were peopled around there, around the 13,000 years ago. But if these other things are true, and they probably are, the Americas were peopled for a lot longer. And these giant creatures, they did not go extinct until we know 11,600 years ago. That means for thousands and thousands of years, humans were living alongside these. These are giant creatures. They're not dinosaurs, but they are really, really big animals that humans had to live by and deal with. Oh, and the other thing that I said I would talk about, and I make sure I do, because when I first read this article, the first time I read about this a long time ago, it was showing these giant tunnels. There's these gigantic tunnels in South America there that were most likely the sloths dug them, but it could also have been the armadillos or maybe both. They call them paleo burrows. These are enormous tunnels curved into hillsides and bedrock. Some of them are 1.5 meters or 5 feet tall, and 2 meters or 6.5 feet wide. I will leave some links in the show notes so you can see the pictures of them. Some of them stretch for like hundreds and hundreds of meters, like subway tunnels. They show distinct claw marks showing that they were dug by giant animals. I think that was the original article I read. They didn't know. They thought maybe they were natural tunnels, that kind of thing. But they aren't. They are caused by these enormous animals. So could I just picture, maybe like being in one of these tunnels and then coming across one of these Volkswagen-sized, gigantic, sloths, scaring them? The both of you would be scared, or maybe that's how they hunted them, go through their tunnels. But I don't know if any of you guys ever remember the old Star Trek, the original Star Trek. They were the Horta. They were these silicon. They were based on silicone, I think. Star Trek was into that. But anyway, they dug holes all through, and they had pathways and all kind of things like that. There's kind of envision it like that. They are these giant creatures, either the sloths or the armadillos or both, digging these giant tunnels all throughout, in South America, alongside of humans living there. And humans, we know, loved to live in caves in those days. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of them lived in the caves at the same time some of these creatures were coming through. To me, it's just amazing to think about how much different it was, because I think the reason I study history, and I think the reason a lot of people study history, is because we're trying to find out about ourselves. Because history is a lot of a philosophy. And we're trying to find out about ourselves as humans and as an individual human. And we know that for a couple 100,000 years, at least 100,000, you could go, some will say 80,000, 40,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. Those people had the same minds that we have, speaking in language, kissing their children goodnight, playing music, name it, making love to their wives and husbands, and they were human beings like us. Except they lived next to enormous creatures, and they weren't afraid to eat them. As my good friend Gil would say, boom. So if you like this episode, you could give me a couple bucks by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You could sign up for our Patreon, and we only charge you when we put out an episode of Fan of History, which is every other week. These What's New in History episodes are free for our Patreons and for everybody. And it's okay if that's not something you could afford right now, but you could help us by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. It actually helps us a lot. And just enjoy and keep listening. I appreciate it. Thank you.